Hello, I'm Dr. Jamie, and today I'm going to be talking with you about AEROVOLARE engines. It is a new engine company that I found that I'm now recommending, and basically they've got 300 and a 350 horsepower airplane engine. The 300 horsepower is the non-turbo, and the 350 is the turbo, and it does that with only 2 psi of boost. It's 50 to 100 pounds less than six-cylinder Lycoming and Continental engines, depending on which exact ones you're comparing to, but so definitely less weight for more power. So let's get into what's going on with this new company that I found. So the first one is the owner. Who is the guy behind AEROVOLARE? His name is John Milsna. He was a diesel mechanic for the first part of his life, and he built and tuned multiple race engines after he was working with diesel engines for a while because he's smart and he just knew what he was doing and got access to a dyno and started doing it. He went back to school and actually got a degree in engineering because he was like, I'm tired of working on engines all the time. And he started multiple different companies, Star Communications and others. And he decided to make modern aircraft engine because nobody's doing it. And so that's kind of where this all came from. And I found him and got the exclusive rights to sell the engines. And so that's why I'm doing the marketing as well for him. So there you go. That is AEROVOLARE. Who am I? In case you don't know me, my name is Dr. Jamie. I used to own a Turbo Cirrus. That was the exact one that I owned right there. And it didn't go fast enough, so I sold it after 2 years. And I started looking for a plane to go faster. And I realized that either A, I got to spend 1.3 million on an Evolution to go faster and pressurized comfort, or I could buy a Lancia 4P, but since that literally has the highest crash rating per miles flown of any plane in general aviation, I thought, I don't have enough experience for that. And I could also go with an old plane, like a Mitsubishi MU or something, and get 80 gallons per hour as I'm flying that thing and have lots of maintenance, but I didn't want to do that either. So I actually decided to build my own plane, and that's the Volare plane story, which I'm not going to go into now, but you can see all about the plane that I decided to build myself for a plane that goes fast enough, volareplanes.com/600. Who am I in my business world? I've had 3 businesses doing 7 figures a year. Vivaz.com was one of my most recent ones. I did that for 11 years. I sold the company in December of 2021 and started doing the airplane business full time. With that company, I got 2 FDA clearances and a warning letter. Yay, thanks FDA. But just goes to show you like how serious I was in that company, in that business. I've been a chiropractor since 2000. That was my first $1 million practice or business that I had. I sold that in 2008. And True Gene Diagnostics is one of my new companies that I'm going to be focusing on after I get the 6-place pressurized twin up in the air. So let's talk about the engines some more. So what exactly are they? So like I said, we got a 350 horsepower turbo. We got a 300 horsepower non-turbo. And it'll hold 75% power, the turbo version, to 25,000 feet. It'll be, and that's for the ideally designed for the 6-person perfectly, but we'll talk about some of the other engine options here in a moment. But in cruise, the engine is only doing 3,600 RPMs, right? So unlike a lot of other engines that are automobile engines converted for aircraft, this one is actually designed to run at 3,600 RPMs, which is, if you really wanted to, you could run without the redrive on it. You probably have a lot of harmonics issues, but it theoretically be possible. But all the engines are sold with a redrive though, because the 2 belts help to reduce harmonics as one of the things that it does from the prop to the engine. So the engine block itself is in a Kohler generator, and that Kohler generator runs at 3,600 RPMs under high load for 5,000 hours before they rebuild those engines and those generators. And so that's part of the reason why 3,600 RPMs was picked for cruise by this company, because that's the RPMs that this engine block goes to for 5,000 hours under high load in a generator. Right now, the same engine block is also used in boat motors, and it has a 4,200 RPM max in those boat motors. So you got a boat pushing a prop through the water. So it's not exactly like an airplane, but it definitely is under more load than an automobile. And it commonly goes 2,000 to 3,000 hours in those boat motors before people rebuild them. And so that's the biggest reasons why this block motor was picked. by this company to start doing it. And they actually have had an engine up in the air for about 10 hours on a similar block. And now they are starting to make the production engines that they're going to be selling here late summer, early fall. So it is a FADEC light control. And I say FADEC light control because it's single lever, right? So everyone thinks FADEC, and most people just think, oh, single lever, right? Well, a true FADEC system means that it's all electronically controlled off of the throttle position, versus this engine is controlled with one throttle, but it's an actual cable controlling the throttle on the engine, and then the computer senses where that throttle is and adjusts everything else. That includes altitude adjustments, right, for thinner air, right, all that different stuff. Now, if you want to put a constant speed prop on this, depending on which plane you're putting on, how fast you want to go, that is a separate controller. But we'll talk a little bit about the props. There's two that I recommend right now, Duke and Ivo. They're both good options for constant speed control. But if you do want that now, you can, if you want this plane to take off and climb like a bat out of hell, but you don't care if it goes super, super fast, you can easily get away with a constant speed propeller, and it's just adjusted on the ground for takeoff. If you really want high top end, you can do that with a constant speed, but you're going to have a probably double or triple takeoff speed, so it'll be 2,000 or 3,000 feet versus 1,000 feet with a constant speed. So you're going to have a longer takeoff, and you're going to have a slower climb out. But once you actually get to your cruise altitude, you're going to be going as fast as you potentially could. So it is possible to use a fixed pitch, but a lot of people probably will opt for the constant speeds. Even if you only go with the Ivo, which is a $3,000 to $5,000 prop, depending on which one you want, that is kind of like constant speed, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But that does a really decent job, decreasing your climb out and takeoff while still giving you everything you need on the top end. Not exactly like a constant speed, but pretty dang close for the huge price savings and weight savings. So the engine in this, the redesign, the redrive is really designed properly. I've looked at it, I've talked to a bunch of people, but they've got bearings at the top and bottom of the redrive. They use high-grade aircraft alloy. They have a double belt for redundancy. And like I've never seen before in any other redrive, they actually have belt sensors. So that if the belt starts getting loose, even, and I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like an eighth of an inch or a 16th of an inch. It's a really small number. But if the belt starts getting loose, even by just a little bit, it might even be a 32nd, I don't remember, but it's a super tiny amount. The sensor senses it and sends a warning light to the cockpit saying, hey, your belt's starting to get loose. Land sometime soon and check what's going on, right? So one of the number one causes of redrive failures is the belt breaking. Well, we have two belts for redundancy, and we got a sensor so that as long as you pay attention to that light, your belt's not going to break on you, right? And then between the redrive and the actual engine, there's an additional little rubber disc for a vibrational torque dampener. So it really is a well-designed, complete little package for the redrive system. And the engine that they're starting with, right, is only 332 pounds, right? Now, what is the block? What is the block that they're using? They're actually using the 4.3 liter GM small block engine. And that engine, the LS5 or the LSV, depending on how you want to call it, is exactly the same as the LS3 block. So many people are like, oh, the LS3 block is great, it's amazing, but man, it's a heavy engine, right? But you can really get the horsepower up there. Well, guess what? This 4.3 block is exactly the same as an LS3, except for 2 cylinders less. So it weighs a lot less as a final build engine for it, and we can easily get 350 horsepower with 2 pounds of boost out of the engine at sea level. So the controllers that the company choose to use is called AEM. It's got a long 3-decade history of race-proven technology, rugged technology, a really good designed ECU that many different companies and engines and race engine companies use. And with this controller, we're using coilover packs so that if any one of the coils or any one of the spark plugs should fail, you're not even going to notice it. Now, if 2 of them fail, you'll probably notice it, but it's still going to run just fine. And if 3 of them fail, the engine's still going to run okay, but you're definitely going to notice it. So basically what that means is half of them can fail, and the engine's still going to get you back to your airport. Well, isn't that what a dual redundant Lycoming or Continental engine basically says? Is that if half of the spark plugs fail, the engine's still going to run, right? Now, yes, if the ECU fails, right, for the first few engines, what's going to happen is the whole engine's going to go out. That is correct. But how often does an ECU fail in a new car? How often have you ever seen a new car on the side of the road not being able to run because the ECU failed? It just doesn't happen. Like literally both magnetos in a Lycoming or Continental engine fail every, boy, I was told this number, but I think it's like every 1,200 hours. Both magnetos will fail in a Lycoming or Continental every 1,200 hours or something like that. It's a super low number, way lower than you'd think. Well, guess what? The ECU is not going to fail every 1,200 hours. That's going to be closer to every, probably I could look it up, but I bet you it's probably at least every 30,000 or 50,000 hours. So even with dual magnetos in a Lycoming or Continental, they're both going to fail more often than the ECU is going to fail. And when both magnetos fail in a Lycoming or Continental engine, guess what? The engine fails completely as well. So this engine's going to fail less often, statistically speaking, by about a factor of 10 than a Lycoming or Continental engine. So that's the ECU controls. What are the actual 3 different engines they're offering? They're only offering 3. One of them is a 300 horsepower non-turbo engine, and that engine will be good up to 12,000 feet. So if you're not flying above where you need oxygen for your own self, that's a great engine to have. You'll save some weight on it, and you'll save a little bit of wear and tear because it's just going to be running at altitude pressure boost, right? So great little engine there. Second one is the 350 horsepower turbo up to 18,000 feet. That's mostly going to be for the Volare 400 or planes that don't go up super high, right? But you got some mountains you got to climb over every once in a while here and there. Well, the 350 horsepower turbo up to 18,000 feet will be perfect in the 4-place plane for that. And then the last one they're going to be making, and this is actually a special one because they weren't planning on doing it until I met them and said, hey, do this. They're going to put a larger turbo on, and they've done all the calculations and math, and then get that larger turbo to go up to 28,000 feet and hold 75% power up to 25,000 feet. So the sweet spot of that engine is 25,000 feet, which is where the Volare 6-place pressurized twin is going to be now flying at its optimum height. Now, the one caveat is if you get the larger turbo, right, under 5,000 feet, you're going to have a little bit less performance. So if you're taking off at sea level and climbing to 25,000 feet, right, it's not going to do as well until you start getting up to 5,000 feet as the other engine. But if you're constantly going to be up at 25,000 feet, like on the pressurized twin, you know what? It's worth a little bit less performance in the low end. But if you're never going to be going above 18,000 feet, you just do the normal standard turbo, and you're going to get full range of power at all 18,000 feet. So 3 little engine options for people with what they are. And so let's talk about it, right? What is this LS5 or LSV, Roman numeral V45? Because it's the 5th generation of block that they made because they've been making it for 4 decades, right? So it's factory made new in the United States. There's a ton of them, like literally there's 72 available on hand right now, right? They are used in generator engines at 3,600 RPMs and a constant load boat motors, right? They're used for hundreds of thousands of miles in trucks pulling loads. They're in tons of forklifts carrying loads all the time, and a ton more applications that these engines are used in because they've been around for literally almost 50 years now. So the basic engine is proven in there, and it's constantly under high loads for thousands of miles and hours, tens of millions of them in service in all the different vehicles that they're in. And so the available parts for them, both aftermarket and directly from the factory, is hugely and widely supported all over the place. So you're never going to have an issue finding parts that you need in order to keep your engine running, even if, which isn't going to happen if I'm around, AEROVOLARE goes out of business because they can't sell enough engines, right? So What are some more of the benefits? I'm not going to read all this text to you, but long story short is if you spray oil underneath the pistons, which not a lot of engines do, it helps with cooling and it helps with lubrication, makes the engine last longer, right? Rotating assembly in the windage tray inside. Again, if you want, hit pause, come back and read all of this, or hit pause now and read it, but all the different things in this engine, just so many improvements above the 4th generation that it literally is the LS3 engine, but 2 cylinders less, right? The oiling system has been revised and improved. The cylinder heads have a bowl shape on them to help with the fuel and all, like just so many different things that help it at low RPMs, high RPMs, and it's just a well-balanced, overall great engine, right? The oil system is electronically controlled. Now, some people might say that's a downside, but we'll get that to the moment. But we think that's an upside because what that means is that all of these different things are going to be better because of it, as long as you take these certain precautions, right? So what that means is that if with the electronically controlled is that if you don't do certain things right, which is the big long list there, hit pause and read through them if you want, you can have issues in the engine, but as long as you do the simple things like, you know what, use synthetic oil, right? Don't run the engine hot, right? Don't run the engine over 5,200 RPMs, and we actually maxed it out at 4,200 RPMs, right? That's full power for us, right? As long as you, change the oil filters at the, when you do oil changes, like little things like that are all that it takes in order to make sure this engine's running right. All right, and when they're brand new from the factory, half of those are gone. You don't even have to do them to worry about the electronically controlled oil, right? The cams and lifters have been known in some of the older generation 2, 3, and 4 ones to not do as well, but when they went to the generation 5, basically what they did is they found out that, wow, it's not really an issue at all, and that as long as you're not changing stuff on the cams and lifters, which a lot of people were doing that caused the problems, there are no problems, right? So again, simple basic things, changing the oil filters if you're doing a rebuild later, right? Making sure that all the cams and lifters are adjusted properly, right? Make sure the proper oil's in it. But again, all that you don't have to do, we do at the factory to make sure that these things aren't problems later, all right? So one of the other downsides is, or one of the ways to prevent the downsides, if you will, is the simple basic things is making sure you're using synthetic oil, making sure the oil pressure is correctly at idle and at full speed, right? We have a warning if the pressure is not at the right pressure on the inside. It tells you, hey, there's a problem, right? And also, if there starts to be a problem, you can usually hear that noise in the engine. Like, that's not what my engine sounds like. It sounds different. What's going on, right? So they're easy, simple ways to prevent the problems. Now, what are some more of the benefits of the LS5 or LSV engine? Is it's smaller than a Lycoming or Continental in size, right? So the space that this fits in is actually smaller than any 6-cylinder Lycoming or Continental, right? It's 50 to 100 pounds lighter, depending on which engine you're comparing it to, whether it's a TSIO or a TIO or which brand, whatever, but it's at least 50 to 100 pounds lighter of any of the equivalent 6-cylinder Lycoming or Continental engines, and has more power than most of them, depending on which one you're going with, right? 300 horsepower with no turbo, right? No 6-cylinder Lycoming or Continentals really do that in any way, shape, or form in this weight bracket or size brackets, right? So the only downside really of this, the block that AEROVOLARE chose, is the 3-bladed props. Because it's a V6, there may be some limitations on the 3-bladed props you can use. Now, they've had one of the props on a test stand with a harmonic device to actually measure the harmonics, and they didn't find any problems with that prop and this engine. So it's not like it's going to not be able to take any 3-bladed props, but because of that, there's a consideration. We're going to be testing eventually a bunch of different props. I say we, meaning them, right? I'm not doing any of it, I'm selling for them, but they're going to be testing a lot of these different props that people commonly will use to make sure they can actually use it with this engine. But so far, it seems like it's not going to be a big issue. Now, why a V6 versus a 4-cylinder like so many other companies who take other blocks and turn them into aircraft engine, this is the biggest reason why, right? 92% of the time, power is being applied to the crank in a V6 engine, right? That means only 8% of the time are you reversing that engine with the propeller out there in the wind and causing what a lot of people call peak torque issues, right? A lot of redrives fail because the peak torque on that redrive is a lot higher than the horsepower on the engine. Because if you go from, look, if you look at the 4-cylinder down below, which is 62% of the time there's power on the crank, which means that 38% of the time that propeller is driving the engine backwards. It's trying to stop it. And so between driving the engine backwards from the propeller because there's no power applied to the crank, but there's still wind on the front of that prop, right? Between driving that prop backwards and the crank then having power on it from the cylinder firing, that back and forth is what creates what's called the peak impulse that a lot of people talk about. And that's where a lot of these redrives break. Well, right away, we know that 92% of the time, we don't have that issue. So our peak impulses are a lot less on the V6 engine because of the fact that most of the time power is being applied to the crank and very little time is that propeller actually driving the engine backwards, right? So that's number one. But number two, we figured out what, I say we again, they did, right? I didn't do any of this figuring, right? All this stuff was given to me. But they figured out, right, how much is that power that's coming out of it, and they added a safety factor of 50%. That's what the FAA usually does, right, with all the stuff, 1.5 safety factor. And with that, they built the redrive to that so that no one has to worry about that actually happening with this engine and this redrive system, right? So now, one other thing too I want to mention, I just found this out, but it's not in the slides yet, but the actual speed of the piston, right? Because that's really what the RPMs amount to. So some people say, oh no, 4,200 RPMs, that's way higher than the 2,700 in Lycoming or Continental, right? But if you take the distance that the piston is traveling, which is called the stroke, if you take the distance that the piston is traveling in a Lycoming at 2,700 RPMs, versus the distance that the piston in this 4.3 is traveling at 4,200 RPMs, and you literally come up with 2,300 feet per minute in the Lycoming engine and 2,350 feet per minute in this engine. So the piston speed is almost identical at max RPM comparing this engine to a Lycoming or Continental 6-cylinder engine. So the actual piston speed itself is about the same, even though the RPMs are higher, which is the big problem with higher RPMs, in part, is how everything's spinning and moving faster, but the pistons themselves aren't actually moving any faster, even though the RPMs are at 4,200. So that was something interesting that I found out as well. Now, there's a comparison between some Lycoming engines. So an IL540, so this is comparing it to the non-turbo that AEROVOLARE is making, right? So horsepower is 300 horsepower on the AEROVOLARE at 4,200 RPMs versus an IL540 is 260 horsepower, right? There is a redrive, right? A lot of people think that's a downside, but if you go back to that slide, you'll see, wow, it really was built right. And the block weight and mounted wet weight are less by almost 50 pounds, right? 50 pounds less this engine is for more horsepower, right? And that includes the redrive, the coolant, the oil, everything. My mounted weight is about 50 pounds less than an IL540. Projected TBO is 2,000 hours, but what we're going to do is we'll take a few engines off, take them apart, look at them, see how they're really doing. But the fact that these engines will go 3,600 hours under load in a generator for 5,000 hours regularly, we don't see why we can't easily make 2,000 hours on these. But what's the cost to rebuild this? I should have that on here. That's an interesting, but I'll say it because I know it. The cost to build a Lycoming IL540 is anywhere between 15 to 30 grand, depending on what you need and where you go. And the cost to rebuild the AEROVOLARE is 5 grand at the factory. So it's a huge price difference in rebuilding. So even if, let's say, that the time we can get to is only 1,000 hours after we start, building up a ton of these engines and seeing and inspecting what happens to them. Okay, so that means you rebuild for 5,000 hours. You're still going to be about what, $20,000, $30,000 cheaper than an IL540, even including the cost of the rebuild. Right, so RPM cruise is 3,600 RPMs versus an IL540 is 2,000. Cruise horsepower is 225. The IL540 is 195, and the propeller max speed is about the same as an IL540 with our redrive. So it really is, comparing apples to apples, a much better option because it's using modern day technology rather than technology from the 1930s, which is what these IO540s are still running. Now, let's compare this to a turbo, right? The turbo AEROVOLARE to the turbo 540, right? We get a bump up in horsepower for both of them, right? Max RPM's the same, redrive's the same, block weight's the same, but the mounted wet weight is a little bit higher because of the turbo, but again, it's still 50 pounds lighter than the TIO 540 mounted, like total mounted wet weight, right? And the TVO is probably going to still be at least 2,000 hours, right? Again, we don't know for sure, but again, let's assume worst case scenario. What is it? It's 1,000 hours, and you have to rebuild it for $6,000 because you have to redo the turbo. Okay, fine. Right? It takes an average flyer 10 years to get to 20 years to get to 1,000 hours. The average person flies their plane 50 hours a year. So 50 hours a year, that means in 20 years, you're going to start, you get to the 1,000-hour TVO, we find out that, hey, that's what this engine is, and guess what? Now you got to spend $6,000 to rebuild it. Okay, you're still way cheaper than a TIO 540. The price for these, and now notice too, I didn't say that on the other slide, but the price is actually different for Volare plane kit buyers versus anyone else who wants the engine. And the biggest reason why is if I'm already making some profit off of someone buying the kit, I don't need to make any profit off the engine. So that's why I decrease the price for kit buyers, right? So $23,000 is the price for kit buyers for the non-turbo, and $25,000 is the price for the Volare kit buyers on the turbo version, right? And 29 grand, 28,700 for non-kit buyers if they want to buy this engine and put it in, say, their RV10 or something like that. So cruise horsepower is 262 horsepower compared to 230 in the Lycoming, and again, prop speed is almost the same, right? So comparing it to a Continental, a TSIO 550, right? Same engine they put in a Cirrus. Again, more horsepower. Yes, there's more PMs in a redrive, but again, it's a lot less weight compared to the mounted weight of a TSIO 550, right? Already talked about the hours, the price, the RPMs, right? All that's the same because it's our same engine over here, but you'll see that it's a lot less spendy than that. Now, these are prices that we can get because I am an OEM distributor for Continental. And when I say $80,000 for new used, what Continental does right now is actually rebuild and zero time these engines. So not everything on the engine is new. Like the block is definitely going to be reused, but because it's done at the factory and because they're doing it under their specs, they actually zero time the engines, even though some of the parts on them are used. And that's $80,000 for kit buyers if they want to go that route, right? So I'm not an OEM yet for Lycoming. I'm working at becoming one, but they have not given me prices yet for that. That's why I didn't have any prices on the previous pages. So where is AEROVOLARE at right now? They had one engine up in the air flying for over 10 hours. Now they're going to build the first 5 mass-produced engines. One of those 5 is going to go up in late this spring, early summer. I've already got a plane that's getting ready for that engine to be put on it. Once that engine goes up and we get 20, 30, 50 hours on it, while they're building the other engines, as long as there's nothing major foreseeably wrong, and there shouldn't be because they already had one engine up, then those other 4 are going to be done probably by late summer for delivery, early fall. Now, not all 4 of those are available right now, but position number 4, as you'll see here in a bit, is available at the time of recording this. So what's the difference between AEROVOLARE and others? Well, their designer worked on over 5 other different engines, created race engines, right? A lot of aircraft company people, they don't have really any experience with other engines. They're just like, oh, I know how to work on some engines. I can make engines, right? The lead builder actually also has his electrical engineering degree, and also has a degree in diesel tech engines, has also built multiple race engines from scratch, right? Others usually don't have any of that experience. The people building the actual engines have worked for other engine companies with dynos and design work for decades, because we also have hired some consultants to make sure that we're not missing anything. That was on my doing. I convinced them to do that, and so far they haven't learned anything new, but it's nice because they haven't learned anything new. So Everyone else usually just does it all on their own, right? And what is AEROVOLARE doing that's really that new? Not much of anything, right? They're doing what's already been proven out there in the industry, using proven parts and proven ideas from the industry and building in stuff that prevent other known failures that have happened in the past. So if you're seeing this before Sun and Fun, the engine's actually going to, the original engine that flew is actually going to be at Sun and Fun. You can come check it out. The mass production engines are in production now, and the first one should be flying early summer, and we're going to have a full, probably plane indoor for sure, though the engine at Oshkosh, the mass-produced one, and first deliveries are going to be in fall of 2023 for those who put down their deposits. We've got a couple, we're reserving a couple of the engines for some of the Volare kit plane buyers. That's why we're starting with position 4, and we're going to be selling every other engine as a position, and all the odd numbers will be held for Volare kit buyers. So what are the numbers like with the AEROVOLARE in a Volare 400? Well, you're going to get 220 knots at 18,000 feet on 17 gallons per hour, right? Pretty decent, but you don't want to go that high. You drop down to 8,000 feet. You'll be getting 201 knots at about 15 gallons an hour, right? Still very, very, very respectable, pushing that 200 knot mark at 8,000 feet. And then you don't want to run so much gas. Well, pull back the throttle some, and you still should be able to get 170 knots at 8,000 feet, burning only 10 gallons an hour. If you want to build a Volare 400 with one of these engines, you'd be all in for about $150,000. If you want us to help you build it with the Builder Assist, we have a limited number of these at 227,000, just because our Builder Assist facility cannot handle as many as I'm actually selling right now. So that's what it's like in a 400. What if you want to put these two engines into the Volare 600, 6-place pressurized twin? Well, that's where you're going to now be getting 300 knots at 25,000 feet, burning 30 gallons an hour. Right, so we're still going to get to that 300 knots, which is what I promised everybody when they put down a deposit in the beginning with another aircraft engine. But now you'll just be getting to that 25,000 feet with a little bit more fuel burn, but still really dang good compared to anything else that goes 300 knots, right? You don't want to go as fast. Pull back the throttle a little bit. You'll get 24 gallons per hour and still get 270 knots. And because we put we built into this a 6.7 cabin pressure differential, which is because we were originally thinking that, I shouldn't say we, but I was told that we were originally going to be able to get to 35,000 feet with the other company's engines. Now it pretty much seems like from everything that I know, that's not going to happen. They might be able to get up to 25,000 feet as well, but probably it's only going to be 22 with their engine, even with the bigger turbo. That's just my opinion based on what other people have shared with me at calculations and stuff. But anyway, because of that, guess what? 6.7 cabin pressure at 25,000 feet still means sea level, right? So you'll be cruising along at 25,000 feet at a sea level cabin pressure, right? $350,000 all in if you build yourself, right? That includes the engines, the avionics, the kit, everything, all the miscellaneous parts we're going to give you a list for. And if you want us to build, right now the price is $650K. But again, there's a limited number of those available because our build center can't handle as many orders as we're getting, right? So that's what this engine will do in the Volare airplanes. Fortunately, this engine will not work in the 2-place plane, but we have other engines that we are sourcing for the people who want to purchase a 2-place plane. What's the range like with these engines on the Volare 600? Is that at 220 knots, you can still go 2,000 nautical miles, and that's with the wings only. If you put the extra 50-gallon tank in the belly luggage compartment of the plane, you can get 1,800 nautical miles at 300 knots, right? So that's a really great speed at a really long range for any other plane in this category. It just doesn't do it. Now, the useful load is going to vary depending on which engines you obviously use. If you use smaller engines, you're not going to go as fast, but you'll have more useful load. If you use bigger engines, no belly fuel. So it's going to vary, but it's in that range depending on what you want. Right now, at the recording of this video, position 6 and 25 are actually available for the Volare 600. All the other spots before and after are sold. So my guess is that spot 6 is going to be gone pretty soon. It's a $100K deposit. Delivery for the kit within 18 months or so. Delivery of the plane in about 2 years add another 6 to 9 months to that for the actual plane. If you want position 25 or 26 or 27, depending on when you contact me from this recording, right now those spots, positions are $50K deposit for those positions, and as soon as the prototype flies, I'm probably going to be changing these numbers drastically, which will be probably late summer, early fall. Full power specs of the 350 power AEROVOLARE within the 600, because that's the main thing. I convinced them to put the bigger turbo in for it, and there you go. I'm not going to read through them all, but as you see, a lot of great numbers compared to any other planes out there in the marketplace that's even close to this, right? How are we going to do the pressurization in the 600? We're not going to be using bleed air from the turbos, which is what a lot of companies do. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting on dual redundant superchargers on the engines, little AMR 500 cc superchargers, run the air through the intercooler and into the cabin, and then we're going to set it with a pulley so that at 28,000 feet, you still get decent cabin pressure, but at 25,000 feet is where we're optimizing it for. And then we're going to have an electronic control of the outlet of air, right? So the computer is going to sense the pressure and change how quickly with a throttle body that air goes in and out of the cabin. Sorry, not in, out of the cabin. In's the same all the time, right? It's going to change only with the RPMs of the engine. And so if even one of those superchargers fails at 25,000 feet, you're still going to have an estimated 12,000 foot cabin level. So it's not like it's going to immediately depressurize where you can't breathe. You're still going to be fine for a while if even one of them fails, right? So, and then we're going to have some over and under pressure automatic valves that'll pop off if the pressure gets too high, or if the pressure gets too low. So deposits on the engines, we're taking the $5,000 refundable deposit. It's refundable for 15 days. Or if the engine is not delivered within 30 days of the promised delivery date, you can also then get a refund of your $5,000. We take cash, credit card, check, wire transfer, Bitcoin, pretty much however you want to pay. We'll take your deposit on that. The rest of the money for the engine, depending on which one you order, is due before the engine actually ships, along with the shipping fee, which is going to be a couple $100 to most places in the U.S. Right now, position 4 is available on the 4th engine that's going to be mass produced. That is the end of summer, early fall for delivery. So if you are interested, give me a call. There's my personal cell phone number, 773-620-9500. You can also email me, jamie@valachiplanes.com. I have credit cards, forms, contracts, whatever it is that you want to do or however you want to pay. We can make that work. We'll also be, like I said, at Sun and Fun 2023, if you've seen this video before then, or Oshkosh for the afterwards. At Oshkosh, we'll be right next to the Pilatus booth, and at Sun and Fun, we'll be right in front of the hangars in booth N59. So hopefully come check out the engine, check out us, meet us, and get in line for one of these engines, because they're great. Thanks, and let me know if you have any questions.